certainly eating fish is associated with reduced risk.
Dementia.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also now we're starting to see other forms of animal products like beef, chicken, dairy are associated with reduced risk of cognitive decline. We know that animal products are the richest source of choline, and we've seen that higher consumption of choline is associated with reduced risk of cognitive decline. There were, just over the past year, there have been a number of really important studies, generally observational in nature. That's kind of one of the issues with nutrition science. It's really, we have very few long-term, randomized controlled trials to show us with certainty that these connections are causal. But the UK Biobank study, which is a very large population, 500,000 people, observational study found that a dose response, meaning the more, I believe, animal products were consumed, the lower the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease by a pretty significant margin. We see that red meat is not associated with the kinds of health problems that we've been told for decades.
Cancer and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's dietary quality as a whole. There was a great study people can look up. Maximova is the first author. I believe the year it was published was 2017 or 2018. They looked at all-cause cancer, and they found that when people were eating meat on a low-quality diet, meaning meat in the context of fast food, right? That, yeah, there was an increased risk for cancer. But once diet quality was high, meaning that people were eating meat with fresh fruits and vegetables, clearly a dietary pattern indicative of health consciousness, that risk of cancer was completely abolished. So yeah, early on in nutrition, I think it was, with poor quality studies.
Sponsored by people that have a dog in the fight.
Yeah, exactly. It's very easy to zoom out at the population level and to see links drawn between meat consumption and anything bad imaginable, right? Because most of the time, first of all, most people who consume more meat, especially in this country, tend to be more sedentary and they tend to smoke more. This is the whole concept of healthy user bias, which is so crucially important. You have to know, if you intend to know anything about nutrition, you have to know about healthy user bias. People who eat more red meat, they tend to smoke more, they tend to be more sedentary, they tend to eat more fast food. Like most meat products consumed in this country are hamburgers, they're chicken nuggets, they're those kinds of foods, ultra processed meat products. Conversely, if you look at the consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, you see healthy user bias there too, favoring fresh fruits and vegetables. And that's, it's pretty obvious to understand why. Most people today are obese. They're consuming ultra processed foods day and night, fast food, shelf stable convenience foods, the kinds of foods foods in quotes that you would get from a vending machine, for example. Those are the foods that are the base of most people's food pyramids, so to speak. And so if you were to take a food like quinoa, for example, which, first of all, if you know how to pronounce quinoa, you're probably reading health blogs, right? You've probably listened to a health podcast or two, right? Consumption of quinoa is probably associated. I don't know if this study has been done, but I would bet $500 today that consumption of quinoa is associated with robust health. Is it because the quinoa is so healthy, or is it because the person that's eating quinoa on a regular basis, that person's probably a pretty health conscious person? That person probably shops at Whole Foods. That person probably has a gym membership, so that's healthy user bias right there. And so it works in the inverse sort of way with red meat. There are very few health conscious red meat eaters. I mean, there are more now, but we're sort of a niche, we're people on the paleo diet, so to speak. Most people who consume red meat, yeah, they're eating it in the form of hot dogs and hamburgers and Subway sandwiches with the fries, with the large Coke. So all that is to say is that it's very easy to find links. And that's why there's this funny truism in nutrition science, is that if you look in the nutrition literature, you can find a study to back up anything that you want to say. I'm always hyper conscious of that. But that's certainly the case with meat because these observational studies, they're so difficult to do. But now newer studies are showing us that when you control for these kinds of things like diet quality, that there's no association. That meat actually is a very nutritious food. And with the small slew of randomized control trials that we have with regard to red meat, we see no negative impact with regard to an actual like real clinical outcome. And oftentimes we see benefit because it's a pristine, wonderful source of protein. It's a wonderful source of many micronutrients that we know people tend to underconsume today.